love it, doing I mean, that is how people get sick that way. All right, I'm going to let these folks in. Hello.
Hi.
David's here. Trinae is here. Ari is here. Marilyn is here in person. Victoria is not here. Kyla is. All right. In like 10 minutes, Mike Baum is supposed to come down here, and we might have to take like a little while working, like trying to get y'all's things set up on the AP app so that you can use it. I'm sure he's going to fool with Marilyn's first because she's here in person. And I'm just going to let him deal with that because I don't really understand anything about it. I just know we have to have it in like 3 weeks. We are going to talk about Beloved today and read some, but first thing, I'm sharing my screen. On Canvas, I have gone ahead and posted the synthesis prompt for tomorrow because normally, or like if we were doing an exam, you would get 15 minutes to go through your sources. You don't have that this time. Oh, here comes Victoria. Let me go change her attendance before I forget. There she is. It's called Public Shaming, Scarlet Letter Synthesis Essay. It's fine that we didn't read the Scarlet Letter. You don't need to have read the Scarlet Letter in order to understand this, but I wanted to go ahead and give you guys the prompt so that you could familiarize yourself with the sources before tomorrow. So I'm just going to look at this briefly. I'm not going to go through the sources right now, but we're just going to like look at them. But here's the prompt. You'll carefully read the following 6 sources, including the introductory information for each source. Then synthesize information from at least 3 of the sources and incorporate it into a coherent, well-developed essay that explains the degree to which public shaming is an effective strategy to change human behavior. And I feel like you'll probably have, or some of you will probably have strong feelings on that one way or another, especially what with like cancel culture and everything today. I feel like public shaming does get used. I feel like public shaming sounds like it's a bad thing, but it isn't always. So you have your 6, and you don't have to worry about this thing. It's like add this. You don't have to. Source A, Crime and Punishment, Shame Gains Popularity. It's from the New York Times. This person explains a current judicial trend towards punishments, which include an aspect of publicly shaming those convicted of crimes. Source B, The Shame of Public Shaming. It's a blog, and it discusses the drawbacks of public shaming. This is why it's always useful to read the introductory information, because like if you were thinking that public shaming is not a good or effective strategy, this would be one to go to because it specifically says it discusses the drawbacks of public shaming. Source C, public shaming has become a common pastime during the pandemic, but it doesn't really work. It's an article from CNN. Discusses the effects of publicly shaming people during the global pandemic, and it says it doesn't really work. So again, that would probably be one if you're arguing that it's not. What is that him saying? I'll be down as soon as Darling arrives. There are kids up here. All right. Source D, the public shaming pandemic. And there's not really any introductory information there, but it's from the New Yorker. So you have to kind of go through that. That one is quite short. Source E, the problem with public shaming, from The Nation. And then lastly, a cartoon. And just so I will give you this much information, if you don't know anything about the Scarlet Letter, it's a story about this Puritan woman who was an adulterer and got pregnant out of wedlock, which like in Puritan times was really, really bad. And she won't tell anybody who the baby's daddy is. And they make her wear a red A on her clothes all the time so that everyone who looks at her knows that she's an adulteress. So it's like the quintessential example of public shaming. So make sure that you have some time, that you take some time to look through these sources. Because when we get into class tomorrow, we'll just write and see which way you kind of fall on that. Also, just to remind you, I mean, y'all have probably seen that I have not put in grades for the past 2 essay assignments. And I mentioned this before, but just in case you've forgotten, over the course of this 5-week prep time, we're writing 2 rhetorical analysis essays, 2 argumentative essays, and 1 synthesis essay. So I'm going to take 1 grade for the rhetorical analysis, whichever one you do better, which most of you didn't turn in the first one. So you're going to have to work hard on the second one. Whichever argumentative essay you do a better job on. But then the synthesis essay, this is your only chance on this one. So gotta come in tomorrow ready to do a great job. Let me write back to Mike real fast and then we'll move on. Once he gets up here, I'm probably gonna like not try to carry on and talk while he's doing stuff in case he needs you, but it'll be a few minutes probably. So let's talk about Beloved and everything y'all should have read. And just to go ahead and be on the same page, everyone should have read through the bottom of page 58. And for next week, you should finish part 1, which is page 83 in the PDF. So this book's getting weird now. Now we've got a bit under our belt. We talked a little bit last week about how something is up with Beloved. She's weird. She might be sick. She might be a ghost. She might be a reincarnation of this ghost baby person. There's a lot of stuff about her that's very childlike. Like they talk about, we talked last week about how like the first time that Setha sees her, her water breaks essentially. Like she has to pee so bad it's like her water is breaking, which is very weird. But like upon seeing her, she feels that way. Beloved doesn't speak at first, and when she starts speaking, she first just says her name. She spells her name, and Paul D says it's like it's like someone who doesn't know how to read, but they just know how to spell their name, which like he can't read, so he understands that. But you know how like when kids first learn to read and write, at first they're not really like, they're not spelling their name, they just like recognize the letters. They can't spell anything else, it's just their name. And he says it feels like that. And then her syntax is just weird. The way that kids syntax is weird. You know how like kids will be like they mess up their pronouns, like her came over to my house when it should be she. Like it's so weird. Like her already eaten dinner. Like it's that kind of like they just don't understand like conjugation. Girl. Hey, girl. It's kind of like that. Like the way the Beloved talks is kind of like that. Like she maybe doesn't say exactly like her already eaten, but she says stuff like the way she talks about how your woman didn't fix up your hair or something, that it's like, what are you talking about? Like it's not quite how we speak. And it also talks about her baby hair, her new skin. She doesn't walk very well. She's always afraid Seth is going to leave her and never come back again, which sounds more like a dog than a baby. But babies do that too because they don't have like the sense of permanence. And so like they don't speak the language yet. So if you're like, don't worry, I'm coming back, they don't get it. And they just think you're leaving forever. So like every day when Setha goes to work, she is beside herself because she thinks she's being left forever. And then, of course, we talked last week also about how Denver is kind of protecting the fact that Beloved is incontinent, meaning she pees herself. And you know who else pees themselves? Babies. Like they have to wear diapers for just that reason. A lot of stuff about pee so far in this book. Very weird. And AJ mentioned in the chat that Beloved is just the ghost baby, and that's why Denver likes her so much. And I think there's definitely some legs to that argument. She might very well be the ghost baby or some reincarnation or something. And I'm just going to go ahead and tell you, by the end of this book, you're not going to feel like everything is tied up very cleanly. You might know what you believe Beloved was, but it might not necessarily be. Like, they're never going to say Beloved is a reincarnation of the ghost baby. Like, it's all sort of what you think. But that's a good point. Like, that's why Denver likes her so much, because we know that she was so lonely, and she was upset when the ghost baby left, or when Paul D drove out the ghost baby, because that was like her only friend. And now she's very protective towards Beloved. Like, she's almost possessive, but Beloved doesn't really feel that way about her. She feels that way about Setha. Like, she just always wants to be around her. She always wants to be near her. And another weird thing that maybe kind of plays into the idea that she's some sort of spiritual entity. She just seems to know things about Setha's past that, like, if you didn't actually know it, how would you even know to bring it up? Like, she talks about Setha's earrings, and Setha had this one pair of what she called diamond earrings. They were not diamonds. They were probably glass, but Mrs. Garner gave her these diamond earrings so that she would have something nice for her wedding day. And then I can't remember off the top of my head what happened to the earrings. Does she still have them? I can't remember. But Beloved starts asking her about her earrings, and she's like, why would she even know that I had those? So they're not even actively thinking, hey, this might be your dead daughter. They're just like, this is weird. So we learned some other stuff about Setha's past, and particularly about her mom. And I feel like that's really important because the whole concept of motherhood is really wrapped up in this story. And, you know, Setha having lost her daughter, maybe this girl being some version of her daughter, it's all very connected and weird. But Setha's mom, she didn't really know her. She met her, but she didn't know which one was her mother, because when she was young, working on whatever plantation or whatever, or in whatever fields, there were so many other slave men and women around her that she just didn't know who it was. And finally, this woman, Nan, pointed out which one was her mother. And Nan, this was a really interesting thing that kind of tells you what life was like and like how bizarre it was. Nan was like the nursing slave, meaning they used Nan to nurse other people's babies. That was like her job. So like Setha was not nursed by her own mother. She was nursed by Nan. And when she had babies, they encouraged her to like, oh, just give them to the nursing slave. Don't nurse them yourself. You have to get back to work. Which Setha didn't want to do. Setha wanted to nurse her own children because she wanted to have that bond with them. Hi, Reggie. But when she meets her mom points out that she's got this like brand mark on her. She's been branded. And she points this out to Setha to say, and this is really horrific, but she's like, if anything ever happens to me to the point where you can't recognize my face, meaning like if I get beaten so bad or like hurt so bad that I'm unrecognizable, you'll know that it's me by this brand. And it does wind up that she's like looking for people who'd been hanged. She's like looking for the sign to see if any of them are her mom, which is so upsetting and horrible. And it says that Setha was the only baby she didn't throw away. Like her mom actually had lots of kids, but she said she threw them away, probably because they were most, if not all, products of the white slave owners raping her and getting her pregnant, and she didn't want those babies, which, like, fair play to her. Beloved was not, and so she kept her. And also, Nan mentions that she knew Setha's mother from the sea, which I briefly mentioned this last week, but there's a lot of imagery about slave ships and like slaves coming over on the Middle Passage. And I brought up the dedication, which is to 60 million more, which is the estimated number of people that died coming over on the slave ships. And they never directly talk about the slave ships, the Middle Passage, any of that stuff, but it's brought up a lot in imagery more than anything. I'm actually going to try to find this weird passage. Because sometimes, so it's unclear where Beloved came from, but sometimes she talks about like where she was before or what she was like before. And you get the impression that she was either like dead before or that maybe she was on a slave ship, which is very weird. So I'm gonna share my screen with you guys for just a sec so that we can see this passage. Denver asks, why you call yourself Beloved? Beloved closed her eyes. In the dark, my name is Beloved. Denver scooted a little closer. What's it like over there where you were before? Can you tell me? Dark, said Beloved. I'm small in that place. I'm like this here. She raised her head off the bed, lay down on her side, and curled up, kind of in the fetal position, which is sort of how you would have had to lay on these slave ships, because you were like cramped in, people stacked on top of one another, people died like in their stacks of people, so you might just have like a dead body on top of you. Really, really horrible conditions. Denver covered her lips with her fingers. Were you cold? Beloved curled tighter and shook her head. Hot, nothing to breathe down there, no room to move in. You see anybody? Heaps. A lot of people is down there, some is dead. You see Jesus, baby Suggs? I don't know the names. She sat up. Wait, how did you get here? I wait. Then I got on the bridge. I stay there in the dark, in the daytime, in the dark, in the daytime. It was a long time. All this time you were on a bridge? No, after when I got out. What did you come back for? Beloved smiled to see her face. Ma'ams? Setha? Yes. Oh, Jesus Christ. My God. I've had an actual heart attack now. Oh my God. I'm so upset. Oh, my heart.
What computer is
Maryland's. No, that's fine. So after you do it on hers, do you want to like be on my computer to do it to everyone else's, or how will that work?
Because they have to make either I need it in person because I don't know the process yet.
Okay.
So then when is the test?
May 26th.
So they might have to come all see me in person one at a time.
Okay.
That's just the reality of it.
Hmm.
After I finish with hers, I will see if you have one of them schedule an appointment with me. I will try and do it remotely, and then if that works, you have to have the rest of them scheduled.
Okay. So we're gonna try that. He's gonna do this with Maryland's, and then we're gonna see if we can do it remotely with one of yours. But if we can't, then you might have to all at some point come here and let him do this to your computer. If that's the case, maybe that e-learning day would be a good day to do it.
What?
If that's the case, maybe like if they have to come here, maybe we should try to schedule it for that e-learning day, the 17th.
How many of them are there?
There's only 6, and AJ and David will be here in person at some point. So there's 3 that are never here. Okay. I'm gonna keep talking to y'all while he's working. So you can see from that passage that there's possibly some imagery there where maybe she was on a slave ship. Maybe that's like their version of hell. I mean, that makes sense. But it's also kind of ominous that she's like, the reason I came back, the reason I'm here is for Setha. I'm here to see her, which is like, it just feels creepy. So speaking of creepy, let's talk about Beloved and Paul D, because things get creepy with them, in my opinion. He starts noticing that Beloved is shining, which basically is like she is attracted to someone, or like she's got something about her, and he seems to be the only one who notices. So even though she does not care about him, in fact, she just like ignores him. He does not trust her, but he is attracted to her. Um, and and we also, I'll get back to them both in just a second, but
Is that the appropriate screen?
yeah.
I think we're done now.
You want to just sign in and make sure? Do you know your info, your login info? Okay. All right. Should we see if we can?
I can linger for a moment.
What do we do
Oh,
to try to do one
they
remotely?
have to, your computer's not set up.
Oh, okay.
So pick one kid,
Okay.
have them schedule a time with me the earliest time they can do it. And I should be able to, but, so what happened was, we have remote access to every computer,
Yeah.
but some of that remote access was disabled for the readiness to work test, the WIN test.
Yeah.
So after that, it may not have been re-enabled, so I have to see them in person. So then I just need, if that's the case, I need to see everybody in person.
Okay.
So just, who has taken, if they've taken, is it the WIN test, is the readiness to work test?
Yes.
If they've taken the WIN test, they have to see.
Okay. Has everybody in here, did everybody in here take the WIN test, the readiness to work test?
Unfortunately, yes.
Unfortunately, yes, David did.
Wait, what's that?
It's the one about like careers and stuff.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
You took that this year?
Last year.
I think maybe it was just juniors that took it this year.
Okay, well then, so just pick a kid and have them email me to schedule a time to the Zoom meeting.
Okay.
And then after I confirm I can do it or cannot do it, then I'll tell you what to do with the rest of it.
The WIN test, the readiness to work test. Okay. David, will you email Mr. Mike and set up a time to Zoom with him to see if he can do this remotely?
I should be coming on Thursday.
But you need specifically someone who's not coming in, right?
Yeah.
Can you Zoom with him sometime tomorrow?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Okay. Gotcha. Okay. AJ, were you able to call them yesterday?
I did call them, but I still couldn't get it.
What?
I know. I just want to leave this. I can't do this anymore. This is so stressful.
Okay, we're gonna have you call them either with me or with Kokol. Are you gonna be here later this week?
I do not know that.
Okay. Because we got to get you logged in. He's so weird. He really scared me. Yeah, we got to get you logged in. Okay, so basically the whole thing there is, David, I just picked you. I don't know why. If you will try to Zoom with Mike at some point tomorrow, we're going to see if he can do this virtually. If he can set up everybody's laptops in the right way. If he cannot, then we'll have to schedule a time for those of you who are virtual to come in for a few minutes and let him do this to your computer, because you have to have it done in order to take the AP test. This is very complicated and honestly above my pay grade, but I gotta have you guys take it. Ugh. Okay. All right, so basically what happens, before I get there, Paul D has two metaphors that he uses. One, he starts talking about Mr. the Rooster. And this was a rooster like after Sweet Home, but before now, wherever he was somewhere in Georgia, I can't remember. And when he was like chained up and stuff, he would see this rooster walking around and he was so envious of this rooster and saying that like Mr. is free and I'm not. And not only that, but like Mr. is always going to be Mr. Even if somebody one day cooks him up and eats him, they'll still be eating this rooster whose name was Mr. Whereas I, Paul D, have been changed so much by everything that's happened to me that I don't feel like I'm the same person anymore. So he's very like envious of this rooster because he's free and he's the same person he always has been, or same rooster he always has been. And so Mr. kind of becomes a symbol for freedom. Paul D is talking about how he's like lost his humanity. And Seth is like, but you're still so great. Like, you're a lovely person. How do you manage to maintain that aspect of yourself if you feel like you've been so beaten down? And he says basically that he has to compartmentalize and put all that bad stuff into what he calls his tobacco tin. And he basically says that instead of a heart, I now have a tobacco tin, which I just like stuff all the bad stuff down inside of it and don't let it out. I keep it locked up. And as long as I'm doing that, I'll be okay. However, in a creepy turn of events, he winds up having sex with Beloved. He says that he feels like she's moving him out of the house. Like, at first, he starts out like sharing a bed with Setha, and then he starts sleeping downstairs, and then he starts sleeping in the little like ante room, and then he starts sleeping outside. And he's like, this is not even a conscious decision that I'm moving. Like, how is this happening? And he's like, she's doing it to me. Somehow she's doing it to me. And she comes and finds him in this little like mud room or whatever that he's staying in, and says some very creepy stuff to him. And they wind up having sex. And in the midst of it, it says he like feels his tobacco tin breaking open. So like, it's kind of like she has broken him in some way. She like broke him apart. And that's kind of where the chapter, or where we stopped reading, where he's just saying red heart, because he hasn't actually like acknowledged that he has a heart in so long. What else do we need to touch on? I only have like, oh wait, what time is this class over?
209.
2:09. Okay, good. We got time left. We learn more about what happened to Hallie, Setha's husband, which is very traumatic. Paul D knew about this the whole time, but had never told Setha. You know, we talked last week about how she was sexually assaulted by school teachers' nephews. And it turns out that school teacher was there too, like standing off to the side, watching and writing notes in his little journal about it, which is super messed up, and not a journal I would like to read. But Hallie actually saw all of that happen. He was like hiding up in the rafters, and he saw what happened to his wife. And I mean, Setha's first reaction is like, and he just sat there, he didn't do anything. And like, yeah, I get where she's coming from, but he honestly probably couldn't. Like, if he intervened in any kind of way, he might have been killed. He might have been beaten worse than she was. There was just really nothing that he could do. But what he saw, like, you gotta imagine seeing your very pregnant wife be sexually assaulted by these horrible people who've been like beating you and taking advantage of you in every way. That's got to be super traumatic. And it did like cause him to basically have a mental breakdown. And Paul D said the last time he saw him, he was like sitting in a butter churn with butter all over his face, which like is almost a little bit funny, like the image of it, but it was just like, he was like, his mind just snapped. And they don't even really know what happened to him after that. Setha is kind of assuming that he's dead because he probably couldn't really take care of himself after that. But it's very like horrible and traumatic. We learned a little bit more about Baby Suggs, known therefore as Baby Suggs Holy, because she kind of became like a preacher / motivational speaker after she moved to Cincinnati. She would like gather all these people in the clearing with her and just like talk to them about how they should take advantage of their freedom now and how they should not dwell on their past, but really try to like live a full life now. And so people sort of saw her as almost like a prophet or something. And was known as Baby Suggs Holy. And the last thing that I want to just kind of like touch on is that there's this story about Denver and this kid at school, Nelson Lord, which like, I don't even like his name. He sounds like garbage. But they talked about how she used to go to school. We know that she doesn't go to school now. And she used to not talk. And they'd mentioned that earlier, that Denver has not always spoken. We also heard that Setha had been in jail at some point. We don't know what for. Well, Nelson Lord at school asked her this question. And at first it doesn't tell us what the question is, but eventually we find out the question he asked was, didn't your mother get locked away for murder? Meaning Setha. And more importantly, he says, you were there when it happened. And she doesn't know what he's talking about. And she's like, surely if I were there when my mother murdered someone, I would remember. But once he asks her the question, didn't your mother get locked away for murder? It's like she does not want to hear the answer. And because she so strongly doesn't want to hear the answer, she somehow falls deaf for 2 years. She can't hear anything for 2 years. And so whatever he said about her mother, she doesn't know. She still doesn't know. Very weird thing. And like part of that sort of magical realism that, that sort of like supernatural elements to real life. Like on the surface, this is a pretty realistic story, but it gets weird and supernatural in some places. So I'm going to read a little bit more because we've got the time. And we left off on page 58, where Paul D and Beloved do it in the shed. And he starts saying, red heart, red heart, red heart. All right, I'm going to share my screen so that you guys can follow along. I'm going to take some water. And also just to remind everybody, I already said that, finish part 1 for next time. So let's continue. To go back to the original hunger was impossible. Luckily for Denver, looking was food enough to last, but to be looked at in turn was beyond appetite. It was breaking through her own skin to a place where hunger hadn't been discovered. It didn't have to happen often because Beloved seldom looked right at her, or when she did, Denver could tell that her own face was just the place those eyes stopped while the mind behind it walked on. But sometimes, at moments Denver could neither anticipate nor create, Beloved rested cheek on knuckles and looked at Denver with attention. It was lovely, not to be stared at, not seen, but being pulled into view by the interested, uncritical eyes of the other. Having her hair examined as a part of herself, not as material or a style, having her lips, nose, chin caressed, as if they might be, if she were a moss rose a gardener paused to admire. Denver's skin dissolved under that gaze and became soft and bright, like the lisle dress that had its arm around her mother's waist. She floated near but outside her own body, feeling vague and intense at the same time, needing nothing, being what there was. At such times, it seemed to be Beloved who needed something, wanted something. Deep down in her wide black eyes, back behind the expressionless, was a palm held out for a penny which Denver would gladly give her if only she knew how or knew enough about her. A knowledge not to be had by the a knowledge not to be had by the answers to the questions Setha occasionally put to her. You disremember everything? I never knew my mother neither, but I saw her a couple of times. Did you never see yours? What kind of whites was they? You don't remember none? Beloved, scratching the back of her hand, would say that she remembered a woman who was hers, and she remembered being snatched away from her. Other than that, the clearest memory she had, the one she repeated, was the bridge, standing on the bridge looking down, and she knew one white man. Setha found that remarkable and more evidence to support her conclusions, which she confided to Denver. Where'd you get the dress, them shoes? Beloved said she took them. Who from? Silence and a faster scratching of her hand. She didn't know. She saw them and just took them. Uh-huh, said Setha, and told Denver that she believed Beloved had been locked up by some white man for his own purposes and never let out the door. That she must have escaped to a bridge or someplace and rinsed the rest out of her mind. Something like that had happened to Ella, except as two men, a father and a son, and Ella remembered every bit of it. For more than a year, they kept her locked in a room for themselves. So at this point, Setha is not thinking this is like the reincarnated version of my dead daughter. She's thinking this is a girl who has really been through something. Maybe she was like locked up, like some white man locked her up to use however he wanted to use her, because that happens. And she's just kind of like wiped it all out from her memory. So she doesn't really have any suspicions at this point. You couldn't think up, Ella had said, what them two done to me. Setha thought it explained Beloved's behavior around Paul D., whom she hated so. Denver neither believed nor commented on Setha's speculations, and she lowered her eyes and never said a word about the cold house. She was certain that Beloved was the white dress that had knelt with her mother in the keeping room, the true-to-life presence of the baby that had kept her company most of her life, and to be looked at by her, however briefly, kept her grateful for the rest of the time when she was merely the looker. Besides, she had her own set of questions which had nothing to do with the past. The present alone interested Denver, but she was careful to appear uninquisitive about the things she was dying to ask Beloved, for if she pressed too hard, she might lose the penny that the held-out palm wanted, and lose, therefore, the place beyond appetite. It was better to feast, to have permission to be the looker, because the old hunger, the before Beloved hunger that drove her into Boxwood and Cologne for just a taste of life, to feel it bumpy and not flat, was out of the question. Looking kept it at bay. So while Setha has not been thinking this is maybe like a weird spirit version of my daughter or whatever, Denver is thinking that. And she thinks that Beloved was, when she saw that little white dress floating up next to her mom, she thinks that that was Beloved. So she's making those connections. But, you know, that's a crazy thing to say to somebody, to be like, hey, mom, do you think that maybe this woman is like a reincarnated version of your daughter that died? And be like, no. Yeah. And she said yes, which is the best answer to that question. So she did not ask Beloved how she knew about the earrings, the night walks to the cold house, or the tip of the thing she saw when Beloved lay down or came undone in her sleep. The look, when it came when Denver had been careful, had explained things or participated in things or told stories to keep her occupied when Setha was at the restaurant. No given chore was enough to put out the licking fire that always seemed to burn in her. Not when they wrung out sheets so tight the rinse water ran back up their arms. Not when they shoveled snow from the path. Sorry, I'm just excited about that email.
It's 2:00.
Shoveled snow from the path to the outhouse, or broke 3 inches of ice from the rain barrel, scoured and boiled last summer's canning jars, packed mud in the cracks of the hen house, and warmed the chicks with their skirts. All the while, Denver was obliged to talk about what they were doing, the how and why of it. About people Denver knew once or had seen, giving them more life than life had. The sweet-smelling white woman who brought her oranges and cologne and Goodwill skirts. Lady Jones, who taught them songs to spell and count by, a beautiful boy as smart as she was, with a birthmark like a nickel on his cheek. A white preacher who prayed for their souls while Setha peeled potatoes and Grandma Baby sucked air. And she told her about Howard and Bugler, the parts of the bed that belonged to each, the top reserved for herself. That before she transferred to Baby Suggs' bed, she never knew them to sleep without holding hands. She described them to Beloved slowly, to keep her attention, dwelling on their habits, the games they taught her, and not the fright that drove them increasingly out of the house, anywhere, and finally far away. So this is weird because all of a sudden we're changing tenses. This day they are outside. It's cold and the snow is hard as packed dirt. Denver has finished singing the counting song Lady Jones taught her students. Beloved is holding her arm steady while Denver unclasps frozen underwear and towels from the line. One by one, she lays them in Beloved's arms until the pile, like a huge deck of cards, reaches her chin. The rest, aprons and brown stockings, Denver carries herself. Made giddy by the cold, they return to the house. The clothes will thaw slowly to a dampness perfect for the pressing iron, which will make them smell like hot rain. Dancing around the room with Setha's apron, Beloved wants to know if there are flowers in the dark. Denver adds sticks to the stove fire and assures her there are. Twirling, her face framed by the neckband, her waist in the apron strings embrace, she says she is thirsty. And when I look at how long the next paragraph is, I think I'm going to stop there because honestly, my voice is getting very tired. And I still got to chat some next period. So I'm going to go ahead and stop there. Y'all will have, it's 23 more pages to read before next week. That's not that bad. And don't forget to look over the sources so that you can come in ready to write tomorrow. All right, bye.